Weekly basis at work, so you more or less look at the landscape and say, okay, I'm going to do the story, or is it the editor telling you, okay, Peter, can you go here and cover this?
Sometimes they would suggest a topic for me, but mostly I chose my own topic. I would just make up my mind as to where I'd go next. And I regarded Malaya as my oyster. I could go wherever I wanted. That's great. Happiest years of my life, really. I'm now trying to get that second volume of my autobiography republished with all the photographs I took at the time. Some masses of photographs.
So do you digitize them right now? Or?
Yes, I've scanned them and put them into digital
That's a lot
format.
of work.
Yes.
During the early days, where were you staying? In which area?
I stayed in it originally with my aunt in Ampang. My uncle and aunt. He was in the 6th Gurkha Signals, based in Seremban.
Mm-hmm.
So he would commute every weekend from Seremban back to KL.
Oh.
We lived in an army quarter in Ritchie Road,
In-
Ampang.
Yeah. Okay.
And Ampang, of course, in those days was right on the edge of, surrounded by tin tailings,
Yeah.
and there was a Chinese tin mine village just down the road from us, Atap huts, and used to go and attend their Chinese festivals, fire walking, and things like that.
Military camp. Was that the Camp Watania? Ampang?
It wasn't
It's
a part
near-
of a
it's
military.
just-
These were just military quarters, but
Ah.
there was a military camp in Circular Road,
Okay.
which is now taken over by the Malay Regiment, and the first international school, the first military school was based there, and a few of my friends were teachers at that school, including the artist who did most of the paintings in the next room, a chap called Brian Chilbrook. Yeah. So my cousins went to that school, Bourne School, in this
Where is
military camp. Bourne, B-O-U-R-N.
No, I mean here. Is it here in on Circular Road?
And Circular Road, yes.
Which
yes.
was it? Towards Taranipo?
I've
Oh,
never
towards
been able to
Churches.
rediscover it because I just don't know my way around KL these days.
It's changed, huh?
I'm completely lost. I couldn't go back to Ampang. I just absolutely bewildered. I find that I have to simply forget about KL as I remember it, and treat that as a completely separate entity from this city that has taken its place. There seems to be no way of correlating the two.
Like that, huh?
I'm just totally lost. I mean, if I go up to Carcosa, that's just like one pinpoint.
Yeah. And the one in
Places in the Lake Gardens, like the Parliament buildings, where I used to go and report on parliamentary debates, the War Memorial, the Emergency Memorial, things like that. And of course the Padang and the Selangor Club. But outside of that, I'm lost. Bukit Bintang, I simply cannot recognize now. There used to be an amusement park there, Bukit Bintang Amusement Park.
Yeah. So with the Gilgit Girls.
Absolutely. I remember my cousin's 21st birthday party when she insisted that we should all dress up as St. Trinian's schoolgirls. We thought we were going to a private party. So all the men got into short schoolgirls' skirts and fishnet stockings and high heel shoes. Bloody painful. And we turned up for this fun party and then declared we were all going to have to go off around the town, dressed as we were, on a treasure hunt. We had to collect 6 different objects. I can almost remember each of them. The first one was a dance hostess ticket from the Pintang Cabaret. I think I was the first person to rush on my high heels up to this terrified girl behind the counter and say, "Give me a dance ticket." I think it cost about 10 cents in those days, 10 cents a dance or something. And I grabbed the dance ticket, fled from the premises, turned up at the Cumberland restaurant in Kubu Road, which is next door to where the Malay Mail used to be, opposite that Chinese maternity hospital.
Okay.
And I'd forgotten that my staff party was being held there. And I'd given my excuses about attending my cousin's birthday. So there I was, standing in front of all my colleagues
In high heels.
in my high heels and drag, and stumbling because I'd forgotten I was there to actually collect a fried prawn. And I said I wanted a live prawn. And somebody had the wits to present me with a fried prawn. And then we had to get the signature of the duty officer as a circular road, Ampang Road, police station. By the time I arrived there, others had preceded me. So he simply handed over a chit with his signature. But the funniest one was, no, not quite the funniest one. The next one was a weighing machine. A weighing machine ticket from the platform of KL Station. You know that
I
beautiful
remember
old
that,
station?
yeah.
And the night mail for Singapore was about to leave. Everyone was there, because people used to see people off, like that scene from The Sender's Door. And I came rushing down the platform, jumping on this machine to grab a ticket, not even looking at it, and then rushing off again. And people thinking, what was that? And the last one was Sungai BC Airfield, where I used to take off from the Tiger Moth to do these payload drops, in order to catch a live frog. And my partner, Cecily, was steering my 2-seater Fiat Spider car across the airfield, the grass airfield, which wasn't operating at night. And I was leaping after this frog in the headlights. I was so glad when I finally managed to get a frog in my handkerchief. I forgot to knot the handkerchief. I just shoved it into the side pocket. And halfway down Batu Road, near the Mountbatten Road junction, the frog got loose.
What?
The frog escaped. And Cecily said, "I'm not moving until we catch that frog again." So there she was with her legs outside the car, draped over the door. And of course I had the hood down. And the lights were changing and people were honking and realizing, because it was a narrow road in those days, realizing that we weren't moving, we were almost disappeared from sight, until they gathered round and realized we were trying to catch this damn frog. And people were saying, "There it is, there it is," until I finally managed to trap it again, and this time I knotted it up and pushed it into the bucket. I think the last object was a durian, and would you believe this Orang Puteh party that we were at could barely recognize a jackfruit from a durian. There were no durians in season. So Cecily knew how to get a jackfruit from the grounds of the Rubber Research Institute in Ampang Road, where she worked. So she went up the tree, because she was better climbing than I, and hacked away this fairly large jackfruit. And we got the prize. It was the first one home, with all of the objects, if you can count.
So the judge could not distinguish jackfruit and durian?
Well, they were very suspicious, but since nobody else produced any jackfruit, they gave us the prize. But that was an unforgettable day. And you know, you get away with it. Can you imagine trying to do that now? We'd all be locked up. We'd all have been ending up in prison. And even worse, one of my colleagues in the Malay Mail, a chap called Kevin Welch, who's still alive in the New Zealand, he went on a similar treasure hunt, and one of the things they had to collect was an English-speaking Tamil schoolboy. He's cruising down Batu Road, and he sees this very promising young lad, all dressed up, young teenager, with suit and tie, and leans out of the window and says, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" So the boy comes over and says, "Yes, can I help you?" And grabs his wrist, pulls him into the car, unaware that he's been followed by his doting parents who see their firstborn abducted in front of their eyes, immediately take a note of the number, inform the police, who rush round to this place where the party's being held. And the first person to greet them is a policeman, a police officer, who says, "I'm sorry, I can explain this. This is not a kidnap scene. Come and meet the boys." There were the guests at one end of the room and the English-speaking Tamil schoolboys at the other end of the room with their orange juice exchanging experiences as to how they got to be there. We should all have been arrested. You can imagine that happening today. And can you imagine them swallowing the excuse that it was just fun? Oh.
That's a fantastic story. I don't think they do treasure hunts that way anymore.
No, I don't think you're allowed to.
Like in jail.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, KL's not what it used to be. But the population in those days was less than 500,000. In fact, we still hadn't qualified for city status.
Yeah.
And when I left in 65, we were trying to become a city. We had a cathedral, St. John's Cathedral, but we had to have a minimum population of about 1 million, I think, in those
To be a
days,
city?
to be a city.
That's
Now
okay.
it's 8 million, isn't it?
Now, KL is only 1.2.
Is it?
Yeah, but the whole of the valley is about 5, 6.
Right, right, greater KL, yeah. Yes, fun days.
So what was the best part of KL then in 62? What was the best part?
The best
in
part
KL.
of KL.
If you want a girl, okay, let's go here.
I think I would have taken her to the Colosseum restaurant, which is still in existence,
Yeah.
in what used to be Batu Road. Lovely spot. And further on the road was a place called Nanto's Milk Bar, which Nanto's Milk Bar.
milk.
Yeah,
What do you say?
they served beer
So
along with milk. It was a favourite resort of the British troops.
Okay.
Yes, there are lots of Tumling restaurant, the famous old nightclub, which is where Petronas Towers are now.
Was the race course?
Yeah. What was it called? It's run by the chap who started the forgotten the name of the hotel.
The hotel on Nampang.
It was on Ampang Road, yes. On Circular Road, actually, Circular Road.
Okay. Was the hotel there?
There was in those days, yeah.
Nampang Circle Road.
I think on that junction, yes. The Merlin Hotel.
Oh, Monday. Okay,
Yeah.
it's way further down. Yeah.
Yes.
Now
The man who started, the Cock Door, that was the name of the nightclub, the restaurant, which is where the Petronas Towers are now. Lovely place. Very stylish,
The French.
heritage building.
Yeah.
And Mr. Lim, who owned it, was born there. And When his mother was dying, she wanted to return to the family house. So he shut down the nightclub and put her back in this room where her bedroom used to be. But by then it was surrounded by mirrors and it was it was the main restaurant. So
They
for
had a
2 years,
nightclub operated in there.
for 2 years until she died, the Cumling ceased to exist. And then I think he revived it after she died.
Well, it's
Must be a nice chap.
finally was sold.
Oh yes, I don't know who bought it next, but naturally when the government wanted the land back,
Oh, the government wanted the land back? I thought it was belonging to the Stanmore dredging company,
was it?
the Chan family.
Oh, could have been.
Yeah. I mean,
But
they
then-
own the entire street there.
Right.
With Maya
Are they the
Hotel.
ones who started the Petronas Towers?
No, that's the
Oh.
government. That's the race
Right.
course.
Yeah,
But opposite the Bock House, all belonging to the Chan family.
right. That was long after my
Yeah.
time. Yeah. Even in Hong Kong, I was staying in the Merlin Hotel
Yeah,
in Kowloon.
that was one. There's several branches.
Yeah, there were. There was one at Kuantan, there was the Merlin
Oh yeah. After we took it up.
Beach House. Yeah.
And also one in Cameron Highlands,
Hmm.
in Merlin. So
Yeah,
those days now.
those were the days.
Yeah. And how's the traffic then?
Very sparse, because most people were on bicycles, you know. I can't remember any serious traffic jams. I think the biggest one was the one we caused looking for that damn frog, you know. That was very unusual.
Well, everybody stopped and helping you look for the frog.
Yeah. I was very reckless in those days. I was driving very fast through town. Because I had this habit of keeping one eye on the rear view mirror to make sure that I wasn't being followed by the police. I had this little Fiat Spider, 1100cc, but very sporty looking car. Bright
Well,
red,
what
the
is it?
only one in town.
What is it?
A Fiat Spider,
Fiat Spider.
S-P-Y-D-E-R.
Mhm.
It was built in 1956. There were only two of those cars that were imported into Malaya. And I bought one of them. And took it all over Malaya. It was a wonderful car. Anyway, I was speeding through Kampong Baru one day. And I'd forgotten to look in my rearview mirror. Until I glanced in the rearview mirror. And there was this policeman right behind me on a motorbike. Do you know, I don't know how I didn't kill him. Instead of slowing down, I stood on the brakes and came to a complete standstill. And the poor guy, in order to avoid me, slewed his bike over and went sideways across the road. Thank God there wasn't a car coming the other way. And disappeared into a monsoon ditch. I thought, oh Christ, I've killed him. So I got out of the car, went across to the monsoon ditch, and he was just lifting himself, I think, waist deep out of the water with his motorbike half submerged. And I said, "Can I help?" And he looked at me and said, "Just go, go!" Because technically he was the one at fault. He was supposed to allow for the person and allow sufficient stopping distance. He hadn't expected me to stand on the brakes. Oh dear. Wicked things I used to get up to.
You arrived here in 1957, but you missed seeing independence itself.
I did, yes. Because of the fact that I left on Merdeka Day from London, Victoria Coach Station, in a funny old London to Margate type bus, which attracted a lot of attention because it was even then the oldest bus in Victoria Coach Station. And it had this map down the side of the bus showing the route from London to India with the legend, the India Man. Everyone else was going to Eastbourne or Brighton or Margate, and we were attracting quite a bit of attention. People were coming over and saying, "Are you really going to go to India in this thing?" And we said, "Yes, we hope so." Can I book a seat? And we said, "No, I'm afraid all the seats are taken," which they were by then. So yes, that was how I missed Merdeka. But fortunately, I got to know most of the people who were responsible for it. Tunku Abdul Rahman, who I was very fond of. I used to interview him. Tun Razak. Got to know most of the cabinet in its day. It was a very good cabinet. They were very bright people. Tan Su Singh, I think, was the finance minister from Malacca. Very smart guy, really. Very impressive bunch of people. And I used to go to the parliament sessions and report on the proceedings. I remember when Malaya wanted to send an army contingent to join the UN force in the Congo because of the Congo situation. Tunku had to explain the rationale behind it, and every time he mentioned the name of the man who was going to help Mobutu, the chamber burst into laughter. Because I suppose it sounded like Malbuto or something like that. That was very strange. And dear old Tunku. I had been very disappointed doing my 2-year obligatory national service, which in those days were required of everybody reaching the age of 18. And I still regard it as an extremely good system. I mean, I wish they'd reintroduce it because it would cure a lot of the problems that youngsters have these days, drunkenness and, loutish behavior. So for 2 years I was buried in a military camp at Sidcup in Kent, in the Royal Army Pay Corps. The last thing I wanted to do was to be in the Royal Army Pay Corps. I had no experience of accounting, but the military works that way. They ask you what you'd like to do and then give you the very opposite of what to do. So I'd said I wanted to be in the tank regiment. I wanted to be in Malaya. I actually wanted to be fighting in the Malayan emergency. But no, I was deprived of that, and for 2 years I was stuck in England. Had a fantastic time because I still treasure my national service days. But as soon as I was liberated, I wanted to get back east again. And as I say, this opportunity occurred in 1957 to catch a bus back to India, so I jumped at it.
But you've not been to Malaya then, so how would you want to be?
I had read about Malaya. I was a great fan of Hugh Clifford, the author who later became the governor in Singapore. I read James Conrad's books, and of course all of them were set in this part of the world. And even the emergency, I used to follow the stories of the emergency and envy the people who were posted out here. So when I got the chance, I was delighted to come back. And
Malaya was representing a land of adventure.
very much, yeah. The Golden Chersonese, as Isabella Bird called it, the lady who travelled up and down the length of the peninsula on elephants. Yeah.
So the adventure came in the form of the job with the Malay Mail.
Yes,
But,
absolutely.
Didn't you say
That's right. I had to deceive the immigration officers who came on board the ship at Penang. I lied to them, to be quite honest. I had written to the Malay Mail before I left, but I never got a reply. So when I arrived in Penang and the immigration officers came on board, and they said what was my reason for coming to Malaya, I said I had a job, and I was surprised that they hadn't heard from my employer in the Malay Mail. And they said no, we'd got no such letter. But they were prepared to believe me, and they gave me 2 weeks grace to actually come down to KL and gain the proof that I was in fact offered a job. So my uncle and aunt drove me down to the Malay Mail office in KL, where I met the editor, Martin Hutton, lovely guy, and said, I wrote to you before leaving England, but I never got a reply. And he said, that's correct. We get crank letters from all sorts of people who want to come out here, and we weren't sure whether yours was a genuine, indication of a desire to work. And to be honest, we don't have a slot available at the moment. But he was prepared to test me on my writing skills, which had been acquired on a local newspaper back in England. So I asked him what he'd like me to write about, and he was intrigued by the story of my trip out to overland. So I wrote 3 feature-page articles about my adventures on the journey, and he published all of them and gave me the job, and just like that, on the basis of my. He thought I could write adequately, but he realized I loved adventure, so he was happy to give me a taste of writing as their roving reporter.
So this is a dream job, isn't it, for any journalist?
Absolutely. I just fell on my feet. I was so lucky. I just kind of bluffed my way into the country, and then from there on it just took off. I fell in love with Malaya because it was so cosmopolitan, it was so multiracial, anything goes, open house everywhere, depends. You have Malay, Chinese, Indian friends who would invite you over. I loved it. And I realized military relatives, my uncle and aunt, were living in a bubble world. They were living in this military cantonment and being shunted from one post to another. They never actually got to know the countries they were posted in. They would meet other military personnel, but really they were stuck in these bubbles. And I said, I'm not going to live in this bubble world. I want to get to grips with this country, So I escaped from the bubble and had a whale of a time.
And where was the bubble? Was the bubble in Kuala Lumpur?
Yeah, there was this military circle. We used to meet at the Selangor Club, and you'd always end up with the same quasi-military crowd. They weren't even mingling with planters and the other expat population. They were just mixing with military types. You'd hear some hilarious stories from time to time. I remember one of our neighbors in Ritchie Road was a major or something, one of the regiments, and their quarter was invaded by an Orang Minyak. You know the Orang Minyak? Covered in oil. And this guy woke up to realize this prowler of ours. So he tackled him. But this guy, the major, slept naked. And this so slippery he couldn't hold on to him. He ended up trying to chase this guy down the drive because covered in oil himself. He was stark naked himself and allowed to be mistaken for an orangey. Hasty retreat back to the house. They never did catch the orangey.
So you didn't quite like the military crowd?
Nice enough people, but they weren't my kind of people really. I thought they had very narrow horizons. I wanted to learn Malay, I wanted to learn about the country, and I found an opportunity when I met a guy from this village, this Kampong Hijau. It really was a village in those days. It was just thatched huts with rubber trees and coffee plantations. And he was a neighbour of ours, and he knew my houseboy, our houseboy. I was sharing a flat in Shuya Grove with a chap called Jerry Jackson. And this houseboy came to us with rave reviews from previous employees, one of whom described him as the perfect Jeeves. So I thought, sounds promising. But it turned out he was one of the key figures in Anthony Burgess's first Malayan novel, Time for a Tiger. Because Khairuddin was the houseboy who's a bit of a pondam. He likes to go off down to the town and the jogged halls at night. and sort of play the limp wrist playboy. He was quite a character. He was a fantastic houseboy. He loved our house. He loved everything in it. And he was meticulous about keeping it clean. And for him, the only drawback was the fact that we were living in the house. So we were an impediment to what he regarded as his house. He didn't take to us very much. He was a fantastic cook too. But being a Muslim, he didn't like cooking pork quite naturally. And my partner, Jerry Jackson, loved bacon, and he couldn't live without bacon. So he insisted on having bacon every morning. Khairuddin hated this procedure because he had these long forceps to lift the rashers of bacon into a distant frying pan. And now and then the fat from the frying pan would spit back at him, and he'd scream and shout, "Babi Chilaka," and swear and curse and express his anger. We would always tell when he was out of sorts because he made it quite apparent that he was having a bad day again. But we actually hired him because his predecessor was a Malay armor who turned our house into a public laundry when we weren't there. We couldn't understand why the electric bills were so high. I mean, we were being charged huge sums of money, and the electricians would come around and show us that the meter actually did read this much. We couldn't understand what was going on. Until one day, Jerry Jackson fell ill and had to come back early and found this laundry operating in our house. There were 2 lorries in the driveway. There were washing machines that had been delivered and were all wired up to our electricity. And they'd put in very heavy metal breakers to replace our fuses. So there we were, operating this damn laundry. And our housekeeper, the Malay lady who was running the show, came up to Jerry with a basket saying, "We always launder your clothes first." Well, that was it. we sent them on their way, and then we had to replace them. And of course, Hyrudin was the perfect choice.
So this was in KL.
KL, Churiok Road.
You traveled around Malaya, Malaysia.
Oh yes, yes. I mean, that was just my base. Next door was a lovely doctor called Dr. Koch, K-O-K. And he couldn't understand why he kept losing his brass nameplates. Every time he'd put an expensive nameplate up, it would be stolen by British troops, souveniring this nameplate. 'Cause the nameplate would say Dr. Koch too fat, you know, and of course it was irresistible. So we suggested that he name himself Dr. T.F. Koch. He compromised. He was a good neighbor.